A very good morning to our guest of honor today, our mentors, and all the members of Millennium MAMS present today. Let me start with a brief introduction of our organization. Millennium MAMS is a not-for-profit organization founded in 1993 by our mentors, Mr. Vishnu Dhanuka and Mr. Sanjay Bhuwania, with the sole motive of creating financial awareness and literacy amongst women. The organization has multiplied manyfold and has touched lives of more than 6,000 women, giving them an opportunity to build financial acumen. The curriculum imparts knowledge through study of current affairs, business dailies, analysis of balance sheets, AGM participation, tracking of global economic trends, and factory visits. Sir, we have chapters in Kolkata, Mumbai, and Bangalore. We also invite stalwarts like you to our forum to increase our bandwidth of knowledge and information. Coming to our guest of honor for today, Dr. Anantha Nageswaran. He is the 18th Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. He has co-authored 4 books. He was a weekly columnist for Mint from 2007 to February 2022. He has taught at several business schools and institutes of management in India and in Singapore. He was a part-time member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India from 2019 to 2021. He is an honorary senior advisor to the International Financial Services Authority of India. He served on the advisory boards of TVS Capital and the Global Alliance of Mass Entrepreneurship. In his corporate career spanning 17 years from 1994 to 2011, he was a currency economist at the Union Bank of Switzerland, head of Asia Research and Global Chief Investment Officer at Bank Julius Baer. He was an independent director on the boards of TVS Supply Chain Solutions, Sundaram Fasteners, TVS Tires, and Delphi TVS. In 1985, he received a postgraduate diploma in management from IIM Ahmedabad, and he earned his doctoral degree from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst in 1994 for his work on exchange rate behavior. Friends, there is a lot going on in India and outside India. These are unprecedented times for the Indian economy, and they come with their unique challenges and opportunities as well. India's macro picture looks very positive, and growth is likely to accelerate once the headwinds in the form of inflation, oil prices, war, interest rates, they all ease out in the near future. And we are able to cash in the 4 Ds: demand, democracy, demography, and digital. To decode this and many more things, today we have the privilege of having Mr. Anantha Nageswaran with us, who is a veteran to this sector, to share his expertise and outlook on the Indian economy. Welcome to our forum, sir.
Thank you very much. It is very nice to know about the fact that you have been doing this for, you have been around for almost 3 decades.
Yes, sir.
And that, this forum makes sure that the members are not only contributing to society, but also keeping themselves updated and informed and be able to form views about what's going on in the country and outside. And I think your observation at the end about India is now seeing the interplay of 4 Ds: democracy, demography, digital, and then what was the 4th one?
Demand.
Demand, yes, the economic growth. I think that's a very nice way of capturing in a very single sentence what is going on with respect to India, both in the near term and what could unfold in the medium term. So with your permission, I'm going to share the screen here and walk you through some of my slides, and then we can open it up for some questions. So roughly, we are on until about what time, please?
11:30, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, got it.
So we would like to do some question answers with you, sir.
Yeah, so I think I have given enough space for Q&A. So
Okay,
let's see. And let me also turn my clock on so that I don't overshoot too much and leave
Okay,
enough
sir.
time leave enough time for you to ask questions. Just 1 second. Let me turn my stopwatch on. All right.
Thank you, sir.
Good. So, good morning, everybody. And here we are going to share some thoughts about the Indian economy. These are the 5 areas in which I'm going to be speaking to you today. One on the current economic outlook, and then medium-term prospects. Then the issue of women labor force participation, which could be closer to heart for many of you. There are public concerns that it has come down, but it is very interesting. It also, in a way, gives me an opportunity to speak about the statistical issues that India's economic measurement has. And therefore, how the digital public infrastructure might help us by harnessing big data to divine the real economic trends rather than relying on old statistical surveys and methods that come once in a quarter or once in a year, etc. But at the same time, we have structural issues and challenges which we can't wish away. And then let's conclude. So first, the economic outlook. So as we speak right now, although the IMF might end up revising its growth numbers downwards for India for 22-23 because these were finalized just after the conflict in Europe had started. At the moment, the IMF brings out twice a year publications called World Economic Outlook, April, October, and they provide some updates in January and July. In July 22, they told us India's growth is 7.4% in real terms in this financial year. Whereas in April, they had said it would be 8.2%. Before that, they had numbers like 8.9, etc. Now, India's numbers have been coming down as much as others' numbers are coming down. In fact, when the IMF comes up with this estimate in October, it is going to revise global numbers much more meaningfully than in the case of India. But even then, India would be one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing economy among the G20 countries. Maybe Saudi Arabia would be somewhat better given the oil price boom, etc. As far as India is internally, on the right side, you can see World Bank, Morgan Stanley, as well as RBI is around 7.2. So we are looking at a growth rate of around 7%, give or take 20 basis points this side or that side, as far as the current financial year is concerned. It is what is heartening, notwithstanding the quibble about whether it will be below 7 or above 7, etc. The truth is, the economy after the first 2 waves of the pandemic and then the milder Omicron wave in January this year is displaying fairly high momentum and resilience, notwithstanding the conflict in Europe and the impact it has had on the prices of crude oil, other commodities, etc. On the left side, what you see let's start with the right side chart here, so that we compare where we are compared to February 2020 before the pandemic started. Other than foreign tourist arrivals and domestic air passenger traffic, every other sector is well above where we were in February 2020. Of course, you might say domestic auto sales is barely about levels 2 years ago, as is the case with the 8 core industries, steel, cement, power generation, etc. Consumer durable goods production is barely up because consumer spending has been restrained. So apart from these, you can say that by and large, the economy has put behind the pandemic blues. Now, in those 2 areas at the top where we are still lagging behind Feb 2020, if you look at on the left side, you can see that foreign tourist arrivals is picking up in a very big way in the 4 or 5 months since March 2022. So in a short period, we would put behind us the shortfall compared to where we were in February 2020, even in these areas. And domestic auto sales also is picking up quite considerably as we speak. So overall, of course, many of you would have gleaned the headlines. India did surpass the UK to become the world's 5th largest economy in nominal terms. It is a fact that, of course, in per capita terms, we are far behind. There is no secret here, but the absolute numbers do matter. And in 21-22, India's merchandise exports crossed $400 billion, close to 420. And if you add services exports, we were looking at an export number of close to $650 billion in 21-22. And now coming to the current financial year, strong growth in economic output. We might look at the data that was released end of August and say it was a wee bit disappointing, although it was 13.5% year on year. Many people expected that it would be around 16% year on year, because we had a second wave in April, June 21. We expected April, June 22, therefore, to show the rebound effect very strongly. But there are statistical issues, as Mark Twain said. There are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And unfortunately, in the case of India's macro statistics, they don't lie on the positive side. They end up exaggerating the weakness somewhat disproportionately and unfairly so. Private sector and banking balance sheets are very healthy at the moment, because last decade, we did have a problem with banking system. Balance sheets were in bad shape because in the first decade of the millennium until about 2012-13, far too many loans were made. Far too many investment projects were started. Because of the optimism between 2003 and 2008 that India was part of the new BRICS and India was going to take over from China with respect to the GDP growth running around 8-9% every year, etc. And therefore, this optimism made many people lose their sense of judgment and risk awareness. And too many loans were asked for, and too many loans were extended, and too many new projects were started. All those things came home to roost after the global financial crisis. And developed economy, despite so much of monetary accommodation and fiscal accommodation in the second decade, could not enjoy the kind of growth rate that they had before 2008. Therefore, global economy was subdued. Indian growth also sputtered. And therefore, many of these projects became unviable, and banks had to accept losses on their loans. And that led to a period of balance sheet repair in the Indian corporate sector and in the banking sector. So net result was the second decade, especially starting from 2016 onwards, was a disappointment for us in terms of growth rate. But that is a silver lining here. We paid our dues on growth in the last decade, especially in the second half. And if you recall, between 2018-20, IL&FS also collapsed. So not only banking, but also non-banking system went through its own period of adjustment and repair and pain. So now we are well poised. And then now, with the private sector ready to invest and therefore expand capacity, but before they could do so, somebody had to keep the economic engine humming. So the baton was carried by the government, and they have invested in public infrastructure, capital expenditure, and these are the silver linings as we go into 2023 and beyond in the current decade. So what are the things that are driving us? The focus is as well, the focus in the Indian economy is as much on growth as it is on inclusive welfare. So the government is, in a developing country, the government has to keep one eye on growing the pie and another eye on making sure that the pie is widely and equitably shared. And the government of India, using technology, is ensuring that fiscal spending reaches the beneficiary. About 30-40 years ago, former Prime Minister, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, did say that only 15% of what the government spends reaches the ultimate beneficiary. Now, if he were alive, he would say that almost 100% of what the government spends reaches the ultimate beneficiaries, thanks to technology and direct benefits transfer, etc. Promoting technology, development, energy transition, and climate action. That is the second goal, and we will talk about climate as an important challenge later. And we spoke about the virtuous cycle of private investments being catalyzed by the government spending. And as you can see below, the payments on the Manrega came in very handy in the pandemic years in order to make sure the rural distress is minimized. And as far as renewable energy is concerned, you can see that under the goal number 2, we have the plan of generating 500 gigawatt of energy through non-fossil means, reduce emission intensity in the economy by 45%, and the share of non-renewables in total capacity should be at least 50%, and create a carbon dioxide sink by about 2 to 3 billion tons as well, and hopefully reach net zero in terms of emission by 2070. But one should also remember, as far as India is concerned, carbon emission on a per capita basis. If we are going to say India's per capita GDP is still low, we should also remember, therefore, India's per capita carbon emission is also much lower. So analysts and commentators are very clever. When we say India has become the 5th largest economy, they say your per capita GDP is very low. But then in the same breath, they would say India's overall carbon emission is one of the highest in the world. But if we are going to reflect everything in per capita terms, even carbon emission should be reflected in per capita terms. So there is a lot of geopolitics involved in choosing when to speak in aggregate terms and when to speak in per capita terms. And we should remember that. But more than carbon, India should focus on water resilience as well. As you can see on the right side, total capital expenditure of the government has been rising from 3.8 lakh crores to 10.7 lakh crores in 22-23. That's almost 3 times. And the government managed to spend 5.9 lakh crores last year in creating new capital assets. So the focus of policy is growth, climate resilience, renewable energy, and then crowding in private investment through public spending. So on all these, we have made good progress. The next slide is, of course, the policy framework that we are following today has to be unique to India, because there is no template in the world which mirrors Indian circumstances of trying to arrange economic development within a democratic framework. So in that sense, India has to chalk out its unique path. In 1997, after the Asian crisis, we came to the conclusion that fixed exchange rates and capital flow opening are going to be a bad combination. Therefore, we decided to gradually open up our exchange rates and make it floating. At the same time, we made sure that we kept a tight leash on foreign debt. Okay. The 2008 crisis told us the importance of ensuring that banking system health is important. Of course, we still failed, even though we did not have the crisis similar to what the Western countries had in the real estate sector on a national basis. Our own banking system overlent in the first decade, and we had a problem. And then the COVID pandemic has also taught us about the importance of health for economic growth, as well as supply chain constraints. You cannot have just in time and focus only on efficiency. We need buffers. We need some kind of supply chain resilience rather than supply chain efficiency. At the same time, we also decided that if there are lockdowns and restrictions on physical movement, digital transfers are going to be very helpful. So these are the 3 lessons from the pandemic as well. What are the prospects for the Indian economy? So as I spoke about earlier, government is trying to crowd in the private sector. And towards that end, we announced production-linked incentive schemes because it is about making in India for the world. Total applications are about 600. The overall expected investment is going to be around 2.6 lakh crores. So far, given the pandemic, given the uncertainties with respect to the ongoing conflict in Europe, actual investments are only about 31,000 crores. The production expected once the scheme runs its course is about 26.5 lakh crores. Actual production so far is closer to 3 lakh crores. And expected employment is about 6 million. Actual employment so far is about 240,000. So on the face of it, the PLI is just barely getting off the ground. But there is confidence as the years progress, 23, 22, 23, 23, 24, etc. The PLI schemes will come into its own and generate the kind of output and employment outcomes that we are looking for. It is being monitored quite regularly. And then recently, last couple of days ago, the Prime Minister launched National Logistics Policy. It's all about ensuring that our cost of reaching the goods produced in hinterland, the ports for export or for domestic consumption, that cost is minimized. We are looking at 13 to 14% in terms of logistics cost when the global average is half of that. So in that sense, Gati Shakti program, which ensures that information is shared properly between government departments such that projects are sequenced and movement of goods is arranged seamlessly between rail, port, waterways, and road. So Gati Shakti together with the national logistics policy, and then on top of that, the ongoing, ease of doing business reforms, GST rationalization, corporate tax cuts, etc., will overall contribute to lower cost of operations. And you can see on the right-hand side, the various achievements that are either already done or on the way in terms of ensuring that what is there on the left-hand side gets translated into physical infrastructure and physical improvement in capacity to handle movement of goods and services across the country. And Preeti spoke about the 4Ds, one of which was digital. The public digital infrastructure in India is an amazing success story, not just for this kind of numbers we talk about, but also for the way in which it touches different aspects of our lives. It is not just about health. It is not just about Aadhaar. It is not just about financial direct benefits transfer. It is about everything and much more. You have COVID, you have Ayushman Bharat, you have Diksha, you have the FASTag on the national highway so that you can go through seamlessly. And then the piloting of the open network digital commerce, which is going to provide access to global markets, even for the tiniest micro enterprise. And then the GST network and the traces. Traces enables basically medical goods being sold across the country so that neither there is excess inventory, nor there is intellectual property violations, nor there are shortages. So you have combination, and also there is a digital locker, which is the digital for infra education. So you can see that the architecture that the government has created touches health, education, insurance, infrastructure through national highway, and then e-commerce platform, tax collection, as well as pharma product production. And the important thing is India has developed it in a public-private partnership mode. There is no dominance of big tech. In the United States, everything is concentrated in the hands of few private firms, and they end up dictating how the digital highway evolves. In India, the model is that the public sector regulates, public sector creates the infrastructure, and the private sector develops the applications and innovations. This is a great model, and it is now catching the attention of developed countries, IMF, and even developing countries. Aadhaar is getting implemented in several other countries. India is providing the intellectual leadership. And in the G20 presidency, there are hopefully plans to take India's model. The India stack should become international stack. The digital public infrastructure India has developed can become a global digital infrastructure, with India providing the leadership. It is not similar to China's One Belt, One Road, because that involved providing credit and tying up the assets of other countries. Here, we are not looking for such gains at all. We are just looking for sharing our experience, our intellectual property, and most of these are open source as well. So that is going to be a great demonstration of India's arrival as a global major and responsible power. UPI, of course, as you know very well, 2 rupees or 20 rupees to 2 lakh rupees or 2 crore rupees, we can transit anytime, anywhere, unified payment system. And you can see in terms of direct benefit transfers and the number of beneficiaries, the initial progress we achieved with respect to Aadhaar and Prime Minister's Jan Dhan Yojana and mobile phone penetration have ensured that DBT payments have picked up quite tremendously. And then nearly 60% of the accounts under the PM Jan Dhan Yojana were opened by women. Now, coming to this issue of female labor force participation, in general, the feeling is that since 2005, India's women labor force participation has come down quite gradually as per international data. Now, it goes against anecdotal evidence because more and more women are getting educated and more women are willing to strike out their own economic path. And therefore, official data produced by the International Labour Organization showing that India's women labor force participation rate has been coming down seems to be inconsistent with what we all observe anecdotally. Of course, the problem is that Indian system of national accounts and UN system of national accounts looks at the data differently. India basically categorizes of the activities as non-economic because they are unpaid, but that doesn't mean that those activities do not generate value addition for the family or the economy. And therefore, that is one of the reasons, if you look at it, India basically undercounts the extent of economic contribution that women are making, and its system of national accounts is not aligned. In fact, in a recent email, International Labour Organization economists told us that because India's statistical department does not follow international norms, Indian data are not comparable. And if India were to follow international norms in classifying activities as per global norms, it might well be the case that Indian women's labor force participation rate would have been rising rather than dropping. But be that as it may, it does not preclude the need for government to continue to make sure, not just the union government, but including state governments, to make sure that there is an active creation of the favorable ecosystem that is required for women to make their own choices with respect to economic activity participation. It basically requires creating the right legal and regulatory framework for women participation, for women's safety and security, both inside the working environment and outside, and law and order on the streets, being able to work in manufacturing and to be able to return home safely in the evenings if they work in evening or night shifts, etc. Continuous education, and also ensuring that women have the facilities to be able to take care of their multiple responsibilities and making the choices on their own. So these activities have to go on in parallel. At the same time, our statistical agencies must align themselves with international methods of classifying these data and measuring it properly. And this issue of whether women in India are actually leaving the labor force or not will become that much clearer. I spoke about the fact that India has several challenges, and one, of course, you might have been noticing the huge rainfall and floods in Pakistan, and even the unseasonal rains in Bangalore just about a week or two ago. And you can see the rise in average temperatures in India over the last 100 years or so. And the correlation between rising temperatures and crop yield is negative, as one would expect. And then there is a decline in water table. and average area brought under irrigation isn't uniform across states. So in fact, I mentioned to you earlier, while carbon emission, carbon pricing, net zero are all basically the pet themes of the developed world, even though they are the ones who have legacy responsibility for creating these emissions over the last 200 years or so. For us, developing water resilience, both in ensuring that where water is surplus is channeled to water-starved areas, and where water-starved areas are still looking for water, how much do they spend in conservation and water storage? These are our key priorities. In fact, as you know very well, bulk of India's rainfall, unfortunately, not only is seasonal, it is not throughout the year, but even within the season, bulk of it falls within, on an average, about 100 hours, literally. So you may have a southwest monsoon season running from June to September, but the rainfall, even within this 3 months, is concentrated in very, very few days. So that means storage, avoidance of evaporation, and creating groundwater absorption structures. All these things become that much more critical to us. So for us, when we talk about climate resilience and resilience to global warming, it is about ensuring water resilience rather than focusing exclusively on carbon emission reduction. And one of the actions to be taken with respect to ensuring our groundwater table is preserved is to focus on the free consumption of power in agriculture, which means motors are run indiscriminately and groundwater is extracted. Consumption of electricity for agricultural purposes exceeds more than 20% in several states across the country. And therefore, even a minimum cost recovery for power consumption agricultural sector will not only make big and rich farmers responsible consumers of electricity, but also ensure that our groundwater tables are preserved. So these policies have so many interlinkages and systemic payoffs if done correctly. And this is where I think that whole discussion in the last 2 months about freebies versus merit goods becomes very important. What is a freebie? Anything that does not create sustainable economic value over time, which is therefore overconsumed, and which creates consumption rather than investment, and which therefore creates a sense of entitlement rather than empowerment. These would be, in my opinion, freebies. Now, I also spoke about the fact that we have learned different things from different crises. Asian crisis is about exchange rate and capital account openness, needs to be done very carefully and gradually. The 2008 global crisis taught us the importance of maintaining financial system stability and excess credit growth. The 2020 pandemic taught us the importance of health attainments, importance of digital technology to reach people, and also the importance of supply chain resilience. So one of the things that we all should be focusing on, if we want to talk about ensuring that India goes from the world's 5th largest to 2nd or 3rd largest economy, is to invest in health. The National Family Health Survey number 5, which came out last December, shows that obesity among Indian men and women, among adults, across states, across income divide, across rural-urban divide has been rising. More than 1/3 of women and men, adults, are having a BMI about 25. So we know that in the pandemic era, obesity was correlated with the enhanced risk of mortality. So comorbidity was very high when there was obesity. Therefore, while public policy can create any amount of health infrastructure, lifestyle change also becomes very important in order to ensure both micro level family economic progress as well as macroeconomic progress. The other aspect that we need to focus on, besides attending to freebie or water resilience or health attainments, etc., for the medium-term growth, is to focus on LIC, what I call license inspection compliance, in short as LIC. We should not just talk about divesting from LIC, the Life Insurance Corporation. We should talk about divesting from license inspection compliance, Raj. The union government is doing it. Many acts are being decriminalized. Many things are now put on self-certification mode. And ease of doing business is indeed an obsession with several ministries. But it has to percolate down to state governments and local governments as well, particularly with respect to the kind of requirements we impose on micro and small businesses. They don't have the financial or human resource bandwidth to comply with these regimes, at the same time focus on growing their business. And therefore, continued obsession with whittling down the LIC, Raj, has to be a policy focus for the next 5 to 10 years at all levels of government. And that is what will prevent Indian industry from becoming more and more fragmented. What has happened is that we have designed our LIC, Raj, in such a way that we prevent our small industries from growing because they have no time to devote to growing the business. And second, because our legal regulations framework imposes huge burdens the moment a particular size threshold is crossed, many businesses end up dividing themselves to stay below the radar. Quantitative limits on where laws and rules will begin to apply have created a incentive for businesses to remain small, and the cost of compliance also forces businesses to remain small. That's a double whammy. That is India, many sectors we say are fragmented. We are small operators, and of this size, we don't enjoy scale efficiencies that come from the creation of several medium and large enterprises. Of course, scale is not everything, but scale does matter to some extent. We have a huge gap in the middle. So in order to create a middle India in terms of medium-sized businesses, we need to continue to remove the red tape and create the perverse incentives that our laws and rules and regulations create to keep businesses and firms small. I'll focus towards the last end of my presentation on this whole notion of policy making. You see, one of the things we all think is, if certain things can be done in the private sector, why can't the government do it? Why can't governments be run as corporations, as efficiently with clear goals, achievements, evaluation, and incentives? The problem is that public policy making is not an easy problem, but a wicked problem. Why? If you look at the left-hand side, you can see what are all the things that distinguish public policy from private sector. The goals are ill-defined. There is a lot of need to rely on political judgments. And of course, political goals and policy goals can also diverge. And goals are not easy to formulate. And there is no way to decide when to stop. Most things, once they're created, they become entrenched. And there are no true or false, but only good or bad. And solutions may not always be numeric. There is no immediate ultimate test of a solution in public policy areas. Few or no opportunity to learn by trial and error. Each situation is very context-specific and mostly unique. One problem could be a symptom of another problem. So how do you trace the thread all the way down to the very root cause? Okay. And then terms of explanation of the problem, sometimes the way you frame it will also influence the nature of the solution. And unfortunately, while we can afford to make mistakes, the public and the expectations is that the government has no right to be wrong. So these are all the things that define public policy problems as different from private sector problem. That is why this paper, Rittel and Weber said, public policy is a wicked problem. Okay. And that is why India's reforms were very easy in the first stage in 1990s and 1980s. And then the next set of reforms, factor market reforms, are more difficult because they are the state governments and they deal with land and labor issues, which are both cultural as well as emotional. And the third element, when I spoke about license, inspection, compliance, Raj, etc., it's about dealing with administrative reform, state capacity, human attitudes, motivation, etc. So then it becomes even more difficult. Political economy factors are that much more dominant. So we must understand when we are getting frustrated with public policy and the space of change is that we have actually plucked many of the low-hanging fruits, and hopefully digital infrastructure and digital transformation of India will make some of these problems somewhat easier to address. I will give another simple example from even a private sector situation of how wicked such certain things can be to design the right incentive. This is a class on the folly of rewarding A while hoping for B by in 1975. If you want to design an incentive system to reward the best in the team, you will think you must give some monetary or some incentive to the player who scores most baskets, right? But the basketball player who feeds the teammates, it is called the point guard, instead of shooting, will compile impressive scores, and he is less likely to be drafted by the pros. The ball player who hits the right field in American football or baseball to advance the runners will win neither the batting nor home run titles in baseball, and he or she will be offered a very smaller rise. But they are very important. It is therefore rational for players to think of themselves first and the team second. So you can see the divergence between personal goals. If I have to be drafted for the next higher professional league and get more money, I can't feed my teammates. I have to directly score myself, either the basketball or the home run. But the team as a goal, as a unit will suffer. So even in a small situation, designing the right incentive system to make sure that personal goals and systemic goals are aligned is not that easy. Okay, so that is why public policy is both fascinating and frustrating at the same time. At the same time, as economist Joan Robinson said, for whatever you say about India, the opposite is equally true. India's continental size, large population, vast diversity, coupled with its inherently complex nature, mean that few universal strategies exist for addressing public policy challenges. Context matters. Policy and implementation has to be designed accordingly. Multiple pilots or multiple policy experiments should be conducted, and there should be greater tolerance of failure and willingness to learn both from successes and failures. Small experiments should be encouraged at district and sector levels rather than high-profile central programs. And as Deng Xiaoping famously told his compatriots, try bold experiments, blaze new trails. Decentralized, flexible model of growth that allows experimentation with several ideas, a million marginal revolutions. That is what India needs. Therefore, we need to, and it is true now that many of the public expenditure actually happens at the state level. Centrally sponsored schemes' role is coming down, and greater leeway is available to states in designing programs, and it should go down even from state governments to local governments. And that is one way to improve administrative efficiency, public policy, give room for experimentation, give room for public participation in policy making if democracy and decision making go down to the lowest levels of government. So to conclude, as India navigates the choppy waters of an uncertain global economic environment, our economic activity continues to show resilience. The financial system is well capitalized and healthy. Government's emphasis on capital expenditure is crowding in the private sector. On the social welfare side, technology and well-targeted schemes are making sure that social disruptions are minimized. And digital technology also allows feedback-based policies. and both structural and process reforms are being undertaken. Measures to boost manufacturing like PLI are improving the overall share of manufacturing, along with the creation of public infrastructure, physical and digital, and logistics efficiencies improvement will also contribute to raising the share of manufacturing. And finally, improvement in infrastructure and resilient financial sector will elevate India's potential growth in the coming years. What we experienced in the first decade of the new millennium, we can hope to replicate it in the remaining 5-6 years of this decade, and hopefully without repeating the same mistakes we did between 2006 and 2012. So on that positive note, I think this is going to be an exciting decade to be an Indian, to be in India. And I think we are witnessing a transformation that is indeed unique within a democratic framework as a country progresses from poor to low income to middle income status. Thank you very much. I look forward to interacting with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for the insightful pointers and new perspectives that you have shown us. Sir, to take this forward, I would like to invite Meghna Bajoria, our committee member, for the Q&A session.
Thank you, Preeti. Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation. It really had a very positive ring to it. We have many questions. I'm going to start with my first one. So there's a revival in India's participation in free trade agreements, and having signed FTAs this year with UAE and Australia, and it's in the process of negotiating with other countries as well. So how do you think, so in your opinion, how will this affect the import and export dynamics of our country?
Yeah, so I think it's a very important question, because India's free trade agreements, India chose to walk out of the regional comprehensive economic partnership agreement. But at the same time, India is creating free trade agreements with Australia, with UAE, advanced negotiations are on with the UK, etc. In any case, we had struck agreements with ASEAN before and individually with South Korea, etc. So what is going to happen is that India's exports will not necessarily immediately rise, because India is being given zero duty access to its exports, which other countries already enjoyed in those countries.
Right.
So it levels the playing field for Indian exports, because India used to levy import duties on them. Our goods were also suffering, but now our goods will enjoy duty-free access. That doesn't automatically guarantee that India's exports would pick up, because other countries have already been exporting to those countries. What will happen in the short run, in fact, is that India's imports will increase, because India, which used to levy import duties on some of their products, is now giving them duty-free access. So our importers would find it cheaper now to actually import from these countries, like, for example, from Australia and so on. So, in fact, in the short run, you must expect, therefore, the import volumes to pick up rather than export volumes. But over time, Indian exports now have an opportunity to show their mettle and increase their market share in those countries. But it will be with a lagged effect. But it also shows that in the case of Australia, for example, it's important to have access to their rare earths and critical minerals if we have to make the renewable energy transition. And that is the reason why the agreement with Australia is very important. So what we are doing is partly strategic, partly to increase our competitiveness over the medium term, and also to provide reduced input cost when it comes to things like coal, steel, iron ore, etc. So our free trade agreements are a demonstration of the fact that we are not afraid of competition, and we are focusing on medium-term prospects and also on improving the efficiency of Indian businesses and industry through lower input cost, and also by creating higher competition. Back to you.
Thank you. Very well explained, sir. Thank you. Can we have Jyoti Barlia for the next question?
Yeah. Thank you, Meghna. And thank you for the presentation. My question is regarding inflation and the rate hikes which are going on. So in your opinion, how can equilibrium be achieved to deficit, growth, and inflation? Is there a way out?
I'm having some problem in listening to her question. It is not
Sir,
coming.
I will say the question. Can you hear me, sir? Sir, she was asking that in your opinion, how can equilibrium be reached between fiscal deficit, inflation, and growth, sir?
No, that's a question that should be left for another full day session.
Right.
In terms of the managing the trilemma of fiscal deficit, inflation, and growth. I think we are doing a good job in managing the contradictions. So we are keeping one eye on ensuring that the fiscal deficit doesn't balloon out of control. In fact, we did that very well in the pandemic years compared to other countries. Why do countries like US, UK, European Union, in fact, are having such high inflation? Because they overdid the fiscal and monetary stimulus. And when combined with the supply chain disruptions, that created fertile conditions for excessive demand growth and therefore inflation. Our fiscal stimulus in the pandemic years was calibrated, gradual, and targeted. Partly because of our own initial starting point, we were not fiscally extremely at a very low level of deficit. So we had to be mindful. At the same time, we really felt that there was no need for an omnibus stimulus to the entire country, but it should be targeted. So we have actually done that part very well in ensuring that fiscal spending, even during pandemic years or in response to the ongoing conflict in Europe, doesn't turn out to be unrestrained, so much so that it gives a short-term relief to households, but ends up creating medium-term problems for the same households through higher inflation. So, and we also, by ensuring that the fiscal policy is targeted towards MSMEs, the emergency credit line guarantee scheme, and RBI providing liquidity, etc., we have tried to ensure that fiscal spending and monetary policy act together to provide maximum bang for the buck in terms of policy impact on growth while minimizing inflation. So we are actually trying to manage this trilemma as well as anybody else, better than anybody else has done so far. And RBI has been tightening its monetary policy this year, and that will keep second round of inflation effects in check. And to mitigate the first round effects, the government has lowered import duties and excise duties, liberalized imports of essential commodities, reversed inverted duty structures, etc. So it's a tightrope walk. There is no roadmap or there is no prescription, ready-made prescription or a menu of policies. It has to be partly in terms of crossing the river by feeling the stones. But so far, touch wood, the fact that the price of oil has also come down by about $30 or so, thanks to the global slowdown that is unfolding, thanks to economic weakness in China, oil prices have come down, and that is also helping us in managing to keep fiscal deficit under check, inflation under control in comparison to other countries, and also ensuring that our economic growth rate continues to recover from the pandemic lows. Back to you.
Wonderful exposition, sir. Can we have Pooja Agarwal for the next question?
Good morning, sir. Sir, RBI has asked banks to put in place additional arrangements for trade in domestic currency in view of increasing interest of the global community in the rupee. So will this move make India rupee strong and stop currency devaluation?
Oh, that's a good question again. It is not necessarily the case that this will lead to a rupee strength and rupee depreciation tendencies to be arrested. Those are separate things. Indian rupee will become a strong currency when the Indian economic fundamentals are strong and inflation is low and stable. What this will help undoubtedly, of course, is to reduce our dependence on dollar and international currencies. will also enable rupee to become slowly over time a global currency. So this is a very important economic and strategically critical step that has been taken to use rupee as an invoicing currency for bilateral trade. And that is a small step to eventually having a currency that is commensurate with our rising economic strength and size. But as far as currency strength is concerned, that will have to come through macro fundamentals such as sustaining growth and sustaining low and stable inflation.
Thank you, sir.
Can we have Srinidhi Bajoria for the next question, please?
Thank you, sir, for all your insightful details you shared. My question is about the current account deficit. We spoke about the FTA, and you mentioned imports will increase. But, sir, how can we boost exports, or is there any other way to take care of the current account deficit problem that India is facing?
Look, I mean, the current account deficit issue, it will not go away soon. It is a combination of infrastructural constraints that our manufacturing has faced, and combination of elaborate rules and regulations, etc., that kept our businesses fragmented. And therefore, I would say if the manufacturing share of India's GDP keeps rising, then our deficit in terms of trade in goods will begin to come down. You know that we have a trade surplus in services. And at the same time, we should ensure that invisible barriers to services trade also should not be allowed to go up, actually. And this climate change mitigation is coming up as a very clever invisible trade barrier being used by European Union, etc. We need to be mindful of that. So to improve our current account balance is to increase our manufacturing exports and hopefully creation of public and private infrastructure, reduction in logistics cost, and the PLI schemes will hopefully contribute in the years ahead to increasing our manufacturing share of exports, lowering our goods deficit while we maintain the competitive advantage we have on services exports. As far as the current account invisibles and remittances are concerned, we are doing well. So in that sense, not having a current account deficit need not be the goal. After all, a developing economy has to have a account deficit because that is what will also lead to capital imports. We need capital import. So it's a question is one of size. And also the renewable energy mix will also reduce our fossil fuel dependence. And that will also lower the oil bill, etc. So it is a combination of measures that will help us keep it at about 1.5% to 2% of GDP rather than 3 or 3+% of GDP. That is what we should be aiming at. Having current account deficit per se is not a big problem. It is the quantum and therefore the need for financing.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, is it possible to extend by 15 minutes only if you're comfortable, sir? Or otherwise we can...
problem we can do, because okay. I'll tell you why, because there is another program I need to sign on to.
Sure, sir. So we completely understand. No, sir. That's why we'll just take one last question.
We are at 11:25. I
yes,
can
sir.
go on for 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Can we have Preeti for the next question?
Yes, thank you, Meghna. Sir, as we can see, India is on an elevated path of growth, and there are many indicators to show this, sir. Sir, as student, I want to understand what are some red flag indicators, sir. Where should we be mindful about those indicators, sir?
No, the red flag indicator in the near term is what's going to happen to the US interest rates, what is going to happen to the dollar, because that will bring back risk aversion in the world. When risk aversion increases, capital flows will get affected, and India needs capital flow, as I answered the previous question. So that's a near-term problem. The second red flag in the medium term is, as I spent enough time discussing, is climate change, the resilience measures, funding for tackling climate change, and the conditionalities that developed countries are imposing through the indirectly using climate change as an argument that could prevent our goods from remaining competitive as they impose pricing, as they impose a carbon border adjustment tax, which Europe is considering. That is a red flag. So if you ask me what is a medium-term growth risk for India, it is the set of policies and demands that are imposed, that are sought to be imposed on us by developed countries. And I call it a chakra view that they are trying to do to us. And so I told my counterpart in the UK about 3 weeks ago when I met her in London, I said, this is your theory of encirclement. And and she was extremely sympathetic because bulk of it comes from the European Union's obsession with carbon emission and carbon trading and carbon pricing, etc. So that to me is the biggest red flag.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Can we have Shweta Singhal for the next question, please?
Good morning, sir. Sir, it appears that the Indian economy has decoupled from the rest of the world. What are your views on it?
Well, yes and no. The answer is we can decouple, and we have decoupled as it appears right now, because well, everybody else is struggling to grow. Touch wood, we are looking at 7%, give or take 20 basis points this side, that side. That is a good sign, and that is partly because we are probably the last 6 to 8 years of digital transformation and various structural reforms are actually combining now to start delivering the benefits. And we were probably held back because of the financial sector problems in the previous decade. Now that that is behind us, the beneficial effects of these reforms are beginning to come through. Our export share of GDP has picked up tremendously in the last several years, but still, our overall trade share of GDP is lower compared to other nations. And at the same time, we are not insulated because we are dependent on capital imports as well from the world because of current account deficit. Therefore, whatever happens in the outside world will affect us, because if there is a caution among investors, then capital will not come in, and we will therefore be affected. So it is not entirely true that we are insulated. We have decoupled. We have certain amount of decoupling that is possible given our large size and domestic demand growth and domestic demand strength. But in terms of dependence on flow of capital, flow of technology, and given our rising export share of GDP, although in absolute terms it is still relatively small, all of us ensure that we can't fully decouple. I mean, we are victims of what happens to the global crude oil price. That shows that we are not decoupled. And our growth rate was projected at 9% at the beginning of the year for the current financial year. Now it is down to 7.2 or maybe even getting lower. So we are not decoupled. We have to understand how to insulate ourselves, and we are doing it quite all right so far, but there is still room to go. And no country today can claim itself to be completely decoupled from what is going on in the rest of the world.
Thank you so much.
Can we have Paridhi for the next question, please?
My question was kind of answered, so we can move on. It will be repetitive.
Okay, can we have Manjari for the next question, please?
Good afternoon. It's been a fabulous session. Sir, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the importance of CapEx cycle for kickstarting sustained GDP growth with multiplier benefits for the economy. This happened in the 2000s. Now we are on the threshold of the next cycle, and conglomerates such as Tata's, Ambani's, Reliance are all poised to make the largest investments over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
In your opinion, is there a role for smaller companies in this area? And if yes, how, what, and where?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's why I spent time focusing on the fragmentation issue. And that is why the government's own program with respect to the emergency credit line guarantee scheme was entirely focused on the small and medium enterprises. And then this combination of, this Udyam and e-Shram, all these things are going to form, and GST is actually helping small enterprises to formalize. And you have private sector like Flipkart, Amazon, etc., onboarding MSMEs, and the open network digital commerce, ONDC, that I spoke about will create
Requesting everyone to be on mute, please.
Yeah. So as those micro, small, and medium enterprises become part of the formal system, their access to finance will improve. And that is what cash flow based lending, account aggregator, that has been a major success in the last 6 months or so. All these things will give them the resources to be able to invest and expand. And simultaneously, if governments at all levels ensure that management bandwidth is freed up through reduced or reasonable levels of inspection compliance and licensing requirements, then simultaneous availability of finance, access to markets, etc., will ensure that they invest. And that will count for something. So it's not just about the big, large enterprises coming back to borrowing and investing. What we are hoping is that the digital transformation and formalization and access to finance will make a huge difference to investments by small and medium businesses. And that is going to be a very critical component of our future growth, not just large enterprises investing.
Thank you so much for explaining that so well.
Thank you, sir, for your time. I'd like to now invite Namita Mohanka, our Vice President for the VOT.
Thank you, Meghna. Sir, when a person of your stature graces our forum, it's guaranteed to be an enriching experience. But today, what we have actually been privileged to experience is way beyond that. It has left us not only with a deeper understanding of the growth trajectory of our great nation, but it has given us a sense of pride and privilege to be part of an era where India will reclaim its rightful place in the firmament of nations. So thank you so much for that session, sir. We at Millennium Mams are keenly participating in Amrit Kal through the guidance of our mentors, Dhanuka sir and Bhuwania sir. Thank you, sirs. We could not have asked for better mentors. And to all the ladies who are here, a big thank you for coming to this event. I'm sure the learnings will definitely help you in your march towards Atmanirbharta. Thank you so much.